Back with that Marshall Randy Rhoads. If you saw the previous video, yes, I'm aware that 2 of the JJ-EL34s are very discolored. What's odd to me is that the voltages at the sockets are just fine on all of them. And I checked the bias, of course. And the tubes, which are not discolored, are biased at 44% idle dissipation. And the tubes which are discolored are idling about 35%. And the imbalance is the tubes, not the wiring. So I think that those tubes are on their way out. It's very possible that previously in this amp and these tubes live, it was biased too hot, or wall voltage was too high, or something. But those JJs are not going to make it. I've got some TADs on the way. The next item of interest is I have temporarily installed a cross-line master volume. I did this because it's the least intrusive master volume you can put into an amplifier. It's just 2 wires off the grids of the output. I can install it, I can remove it. There's no sign, there will be no sign afterwards that it was ever there. Is it a great master volume? No, but it works well enough for me to test this amp without going deaf, because this thing is a beast and I just cannot play it at full volume and be in the room with it. I tried a pre-phase inverter master volume temporarily, hanging it off the wiper of the treble pot. That sucked all the juice out of the phase inverter. The amp just sounded sterile. This sounds better, works for our purposes. I tried a red box with a dummy load, which I often use for testing very loud amps. That tells me if there's a problem. I can hear oscillation, I can hear squeal, I get a general sense, but it doesn't really tell us what the amp sounds like, and I don't have the interaction between the pickups and the speakers with that. So I think this will be the way to go. I have this turned up just above the point where the negative feedback collapses, which means that below this point, the present circuit would do nothing. So while it's nowhere near as loud as the amp wants to be, it's still quite loud. If you actually watched all the way to the end of the previous video, you'll have heard me talk about one thing I could do that was kind of a little secret trick, and that's why I have this tape here. I'm not sharing my trick with the world. That lets me adjust the gain of channel 1 for as much gain as I want without affecting channel 2. So I'm going to channel 2 right now. And I'm going to turn this pot all the way up. No change, because when channel 1 is not being used, it is totally out of the circuit. While I'm here, let's do a little test to show how much gain is coming from channel 1 into channel 2. In the final thing, there won't be a whole bunch of tape in a pot. This will be replaced with fixed components that will be almost invisible. But this will give us a lot more gain out of channel 1 should we want it. So the next thing I've got to do is see where channel 2 is without this, and then see how much goosing we need to do. So I'm going to turn channel 1's volume all the way down, go to channel 2, and we should have a very nice Marshall clean. As I turn that up, as I turn it all the way up, all right, that sounds pretty good. It's got a lot of attitude. It's got a nice clean to it. I might be able to go a little bit of a bright cap on there without making the clean two nails on the blackboard. But it's about perfect. So I'm going to have channel 2 all the way up, channel 1 all the way down, and we're going to go into channel 1. I'm going to keep this pot up here. We're going to add a little bit of channel 1 to channel 2, see what happens to the sound. I'll turn that down some. Got to find the sweet spot. I had a very small window on the previous pot I was using between oscillation and sounding good and sounding just not being enough. So I changed out that larger value pot for a much smaller value pot, which should give me a better range. And I felt that channel 1, since it had the 330 microfarad cap across its cathode, just was putting too much low into the mix. So I'm starting with the big guns. I put a 4.7 nanofarad bright cap on the channel 1 volume, which should certainly give it a lot more upper mid-range and treble emphasis, a little bit less lows. So let's see how this does in terms of pushing channel 2. All right, that sounded pretty promising. I turn both of them all the way up, and I'm going to turn this pot until I hear oscillation start. Right there. That's oscillation. Stops right there. I want to go a little bit lower than that, just because tubes have different gain factors. I don't want to set this for this particular set of tubes, and the next tube pushes it just slightly over that. So just a little bit lower than that. And now by increasing the gain that's available out of channel 1, we don't have to run channel 1 all the way up to get a big push. We can run it at those lower levels, 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and that'll take advantage of that bright cap. I've got to switch to the Les Paul real fast. Got a detune for this one. That's a lot of fun, even if you don't usually play that kind of music like I don't. I want to see one other thing here. So I'm going to go to channel 2 with it dimed without channel 1 at all for comparisons. That's dimed now on channel 2. So now we're just going to go into channel 1 and bring channel 1 up enough until we hear that begin to shift and get that more of a treble snarl. Even with channel 1 turned relatively down, it still gooses the hell out of channel 2. And in the hands of a more metal player, I think it'll do great things. Now remember, that's with that crossline master volume. This thing's operating at about 1/3 of its potential output. Now what I think is important about what I just did, and you'll hear when it's finished that the noise level will all be low again soon, is that if you don't use channel 1 and you use channel 2 by itself, you now have traditional Marshall cleans as well. Little bit goosed. Maybe I'll turn down the available gain on that channel just slightly for a better clean, because we've got gain to spare on the other, and that will just make this adjust a bit differently. Of course, that's with Les Paul. With the Strat, it'd be very clean. Yeah, I think I might play around with decreasing the gain on channel 2 a little bit. Just let's try it right above where it stops making noise. No, it's fine. That's a nice place to be. If you're a better player. So what I need to do now is just fine tune this measurement, find exactly where the oscillation starts in, measure that, and where it's totally safe, and then choose the resistor that replaces that pot. I'll do that off camera. I'm really pleased with where this is at right now. So I got to a certain point last night, and I was really pleased with where it was. But there was a graininess to the higher gain stuff that made me think it wasn't quite right yet. And there was just a little too much gain on channel 2. It made it harder to get a clean sound. Had a very narrow range for the clean sound. So you'll see here what I've done, and then you'll get to hear it. Here on V1, in addition to finding a Sovtech, Macel branded Sovtech 12AX7 that I can include with the amp since preamp tubes are unavailable right now, that solved the microphonics issue. You can see I moved this grid. This is the channel 1 input grid connection from over here, where it was running by this heater wire, to over here, where it runs to the center, and it's well away from the two heaters. So that really reduces buzz a nice amount in these amps. You can also see that I've added a cap here. That's going to give you a negative 3 dB point, about 3.7K, which is just a very gentle dip at 3.7K. 5K is about as high a frequency as you get through a guitar cab, some less. By the time it gets up to 18K and higher, it's actually rolling off quite a bit there. So it's a very subtle change to the high end of what we play, but it's going to take a lot of hiss out. It's going to prevent a lot of oscillations. It's going to make the stage more stable, and it's very easily removable if we want this to be put back to stock, and that wire can easily be moved back if you want it back to stock. I did a similar grid wire moving on V3A in the phase inverter away from the heaters, though the phase inverter is a little less susceptible to that. I decided to go ahead and lower the maximum gain available in channel 2 by itself because the amp has gain to spare. I reconnected that bridge. I did it from the top side because I didn't want to take everything apart again. And this is fine, and it's easily reversible. This just takes the 470K that's coming from the wiper of the channel 2 volume, and instead of just going to the grid, it also goes through this 470K resistor to ground. So that part's back to the 59 circuit, and that makes channel 2 have a much more vintage range of gains, gives us a nicer control over the clean, and as you'll hear, we're not losing any maximum gain from this. I mean, technically we are, but it actually puts it in a sweeter spot. At the end of last night's progress, there was a grain equality to the gain stages, and I dialed it out. Part of that was because I finalized that resistor that was the pot in the previous part of the video. It's now 47K, tucked away where no one will see it, and it stays my little secret, but it does a wonderful thing, and you'll hear that. I really like the sound of the 4.7 nanofarad bright cap on the channel 1 volume. In stock form, there was no bright cap here. It was on channel 2. I thought it made this channel really anemic, and transition to gain was just too much. You had no cleans on channel 2. By putting it here and keeping channel 1 much more full range, this lets us really dial in that snarl when we add in channel 1. I think it's a much better approach. This deviates from the one-wire mod, but not by much, and it sounds better. That's subjective, but I've played an awful lot of Marshalls, and I know what people are looking for. I think the owner will agree. Also means that if you're just using channel 2, you don't have a bright cap, and that's his preferred sound on most amps. So that's nice. All right, with the old JJs, these two of which were discolored, the amp was had 36.7 negative volts at the bias supply, and the good pair of tubes was idling about 44%. The bad pair was idling about 35%. I swapped out for this match quad of TAD EL34s, the red bases. And with the bias setting the same, wall voltage the same, these tubes were actually drawing quite a bit much more current. These two were at 76.2. These two were at 72.9. That's with the same bias setting and plate setting and wall voltage that the JJs were barely drawing any current from, which told me that all 4 tubes were weak. The 2 that had gotten overheated were even weaker. So I adjusted this, and now this pair is at 60.1% idle dissipation. This pair is at 58% dissipation. That's a real world perfect match. Great set of tubes. The circuit is healthy. For those who care, that means the plate voltage is at 435 and the bias voltage at the grid is at negative 38.9 volts. Now, I don't use bias meter things, plug-in stuff, the stuff you put between the tube and the socket. I do it a very dangerous way. I measure actual plate current. I don't put that in videos because it'd be really easy for someone to copy me without knowing what they're doing or understanding all the things I do and kill themselves or kill their amp. And so I don't put my biasing on the internet. It's just not worth it to me. For the average person, those bias meters that you can buy, the plug-in stuff, are just fine. If anything, they'll lead you to be a little more conservative than you think you are, and that's for the good. For those out there reading internet forums and chasing 70% or 75%, don't. You're just going to shorten your tube life. You're not going to have any great increase in sound. Just don't go higher than 65% unless you are very sure that your wall voltage will never increase. Okay, with all those tweaks, I think it's now finalized. I think this is ready for the client. And like I said before, once he's lived with it for a while, he'll have a better sense of what it does, what he might want it to be a little bit different in either direction, here and there. That's totally subjective. Or he may think it's just perfect as is. So let's take it out of standby. And I've got the master volume that I installed temporarily all the way up. And we're just going to go for some clean sounds out of channel 2. There it is. You've been waiting for it. I've got the presence at 10 o'clock, the bass at 10 o'clock, and the mids at about 2 o'clock, and the treble about noon. I'm not going to change that for any of these things. So let's do a little bit more clean stuff. So I got that little bit of attitude. Let me turn it down a little bit more. It's a very nice, loud, clean. It's great. I'm going to turn the master volume down a little bit. We're going to turn the gain on channel 2 up a bit. Haven't touched anything else on the amp. It's more of that a little edge of crunch. If I go to the bridge humbucker. If I back off on the guitar volume. If I bring the gain up, let's go ahead and bring it up all the way. Turn the master down a little bit for the mic pre's sake and my ear's sake. That's kind of fun. I turn that gain down to about, I'd say, I don't have the knobs on, so I'm feeling the little slot in the knurling with my thumbnail. It's about 2 o'clock. Does that typical Marshall thing, but if I use a single coil and back off. right, I'm very happy with that. So now let's go to channel 1. We're going to leave channel 2 with its gain set to about 2 o'clock, about noon on the treble, about almost 2 o'clock on the mids, I think. I feel that. Yeah, about 2 o'clock on the mids. Bass and presence down about 10 o'clock. Now go down on the master volume a little bit. It's hard to judge these things before you hear them. So I've got the channel volume all the way down on channel 1. Just gonna stick with the humbucker here. I'm just gonna bring channel 1's gain up until I like the sound. It's gonna be a little brighter, a little more upper mids than channel 2 by itself. So even though channel 1's gain is relatively low, it's about 9 o'clock right now, it really pushes and changes the character of the channel 2 response. Now if I bring up the channel 2 gain at that same point, as you can hear, I'm not a heavy metal player, but the amp wants to meet one, and hopefully it will soon. So I think that's a pretty insane combination of sounds you can get from just 2 channels and moving the knobs different positions. And you can even do some funky, cleanish stuff with this. Let me show you that. I know most people getting the Randy Rhoads thing aren't looking for that. Most people doing the one-wire mod in general aren't looking for that, but it's a cool thing. So let me go to turn both of them down. I don't think that's going to be anyone's core guitar sound, but for overdubs, you know, building a track with layers, that can be a cool thing. Let me turn the treble down, the mids down, the bass up, and this is going to be a bridge humbucker in parallel mode. That'd be kind of cool if you want to do a layered thing where you're double tracking the same part, like some Stone Temple Pilots stuff. Just to have something that's just your nasal, your honk, your 2K right there in the mix, slotted in perfectly. What sounds kind of nasally and thin at the clean stuff can be just the ticket for the loud, ultra high gain stuff. And I think this amp is pretty good. Let me show you one more thing before I stop. Let me put the shielding on top and lower the noise floor. I can do it without hitting all the cameras and stuff. And we're gonna go back up.